They're things with which we can align, while others of them, although seemingly simple, can be more challenging for us to follow and adhere to. If we look, we see that the first 4 of the 10, no other gods, no images or idols, no misuse of God's name, and the observation of Sabbath, are about us and our relationship with God, things that God calls us into so that we may draw nearer and be in relationship with God and follow God. They let us know what God asks of us and expects from us. The remaining 6, honoring your parents, no killing, no adultery, no stealing, no lying, and no coveting, speak not only to how we are to conduct ourselves as we strive to honor God, but also call us to an intentional care of our community and of one another. And I think there are some assumptions that are embedded inside of the commandments. The first assumption is that God is the one true God, and that God calls each of us to commune with God and to find in God rest and the pathway to peaceful and loving relationship with others. It's relationship that's expressed inside of respect and gratitude and a commitment to do no harm. So there were 3 of the 10 that caught my attention this week, and they are the Sabbath, idols, and coveting. So let's begin with Sabbath. Now, Sabbath is observing 1 day in 7 when God commands all of us to hit the pause button, to walk away and leave the work that we do behind, to let go of the demands of our lives, especially things that tend to consume us or define us. We are asked by God for 1 day in 7 to give ourselves fully into God's tending and care. God's intention, I think, is multifaceted. First, God desires that we, like God, might actually rest from our labors, and that we might find ourselves renewed, and that we might garner from God in Sabbath the energy and the focus that we need to go back out into the world. In the Jewish tradition, Sabbath commences with the Shabbat, and then it begins on Friday night and it ends on Saturday evening at sundown. In the most orthodox of Jewish communities, labor of any kind is prohibited. That includes flipping a light switch, making food, wearing your Apple Watch. Inside the Christian tradition, Sabbath is typically honored, most commonly on Sunday, when believers gather together for worship, and then are called by God to take time for the balance of that day to rest and to relax, and perhaps to reconnect with one another. Now, because Sundays are a work day for me, I have scheduled my Sabbath for Fridays. So I depart, to the best of my ability, I depart the office on Thursday evening, and I do my best to leave the tasks and the to-dos and the things and the projects behind. Leave them there at the office. And I arrive home ready to begin my Sabbath. Usually it's dinner with Peter, but then the next morning, my Sabbath begins with sleeping in, taking quiet time for myself and God. Perhaps I watch a movie, or I read a book, or I take a nap, or I take a walk. Whatever seems good in the absence of work works. I'm seeking to find things inside Sabbath that delight me and that restore me. And I find there this much-needed sacred space in which I can tend to my own well-being and my own spirit so that I am better able to tend to yours. And still, one of the most difficult things for me to do on my Sabbath is to intentionally disconnect from technology. Anybody have that problem? Specifically, I struggle to not look for and answer emails, to not respond to text messages, and to not engage in scrolling through social media. Now, while I use my smartphone for all sorts of really valid and practical things like reading and research, calendaring, learning Spanish, and sharpening my brain with the New York Times Spelling Bee and Wordle, my phone has become an idol. It has become something that tempts me like peanut butter cups from Trader Joe's. And if I am not careful, and you've seen the tub of Trader Joe's peanut butter cups, if I'm not careful and intentional, I can lose myself. I can lose my connection to others, and with many hours spent inside of social media, I go down the rabbit hole through apps like Facebook and Instagram. I have been known to sit next to Peter for 2 hours on the couch, not uttering a word to him because I'm here. I became very much aware of this about myself when the Lenten season began this year. And so I decided that I would do my best to cut back, to frame the time that I spend, and to be aware of just what happens when I lose hours in precious connection. If an invitation to Sabbath is to consistently disconnect from that which gets between us and God, then the call by God is to do so that we can reconnect with the holy. Then it makes sense, doesn't it, that perhaps taking a Sabbath from one's telephone and social media might be highly recommended. In fact, Statistica.com reports that the average person spends over 4.5 hours per day, 1/3 of their waking hours, using their phone, not for phone calls, but for non-voice activities. And that doesn't even include the time that we spend on computers or tablets or streaming like YouTube. I mean, it just doesn't count that. So the reality is that this technology thing is one of our common day idols. It is something that wants to trick us and tempt us into being there and then doesn't want to let us go. In the classic movie, The Devil Wears Prada, Andy, who is played by Anne Hathaway, is a young wannabe journalist who lands her first job as an assistant to the editor-in-chief of a major fashion magazine in New York City. She begins the job with intrigue and excitement, but soon the job begins to consume her. On call 24/7, the job, and particularly her boss, Miranda Priestley, imposes upon her life. And this causes friction between her and her friends and her family, and particularly between her and her boyfriend, Nate. But Andy doesn't see that she's trapped. She defends, and she says, I don't have a choice. This is what I have to do. And I think, though, we always have a choice. Her wake-up calls comes when her boyfriend, Nate, says to her, after, in the middle of a very important conversation, her phone rings and she goes to take it. He says to her, the person whose call you take is the one you're in relationship with. He makes it very clear to her that her priorities have become skewed. Now, while this movie has lots of poignant and funny moments, it's amazing how it shines light on just how easy it is to succumb to the temptation of idolatry. The things that feed our egos and give us some sense of autonomy and self-reliance, but then somehow distance us from God. Andy's absolute surrender of herself to the every whim of her boss quickly puts her boss up on a pedestal to be worshiped, to be glorified. Idolatry is the praise of false gods or other gods. The question is, what is the God that's tempting you? Idolatry manifests in many different ways. It manifests in work that consumes us, or work that gives us such an idea of our own self-importance that we lose sight of others. It manifests in the ways that we vie for status and power and control and wealth. It shows up in the ways in which we indulge the things that matter to us with little consideration to what actually matters for others. Idols pull our attention from God as they work to convince us that what they give us in return is not only more valuable than what God can give us, but it matters more to us. And still, God is clear. God is to be first in our lives. God should be the only thing that we worship. And we are to be honoring God regularly with our time and our presence, and show it in the way that we care for others. Again and again, God invites us to turn from the things that distract us and tempt us, and to trust that we can return to the comfort and assurance that we are beloved, that we are enough, that we matter. Can you name something that gets between you and God? Now, we live inside of a culture of acquisition. We all know that advertisers across all media platforms, whether it's TV or radio or social media or whatever, advertisers work exceedingly hard to hook and bait us. They tell us that they have something that we need. They paint pictures of what it looks like to have that thing, and they get us frothing to have it. As we compare ourselves and what we have with others, envy gets amplified. We become people who perceive others as more fortunate, healthier, wiser, more attractive, and we might even succumb to the belief that we need or should have what they have. My friends, we begin to covet. How many of you have coveted? Human condition. Now, the 10th commandment names coveting in the context of animals, property, and wives. And actually, God goes one step further and just says, anything that belongs to your neighbor, you're not to covet it. Now, to us today, we might be coveting things like homes or cars, jobs, travel, relationships. I know that for a couple of years, I was coveting electric cars. Every time I looked around this parking lot, I saw somebody else new drive in with an electric car. We have Kias, we have Subarus, we have Teslas, we have all sorts of electric cars. And I kept saying to Peter, we need an electric car. And Peter would say, no, we don't. And then I'd come back and I'd say, we need an electric car. We need an electric car. And he kept saying, why do you think you need an electric car? You have a fabulous car. You drive 5 miles to work. It's no car payment. You don't need an electric car. And he was right. And what he helped me realize is that I was coveting something that I imagined would be very cool and bring me all sorts of pleasure and be trendy, when in fact, I didn't really have a need for it at all. What we know is that when we covet whatever it is, when we really want to think that we deserve to have what belongs to someone else, we get caught up in jealousy. And then that begins to breed resentment, and it makes us discontent. Some of us may lose rationale. We may be tempted to pursue what we want so aggressively that we end up doing it at the expense of ourselves or of others. Because when we covet, when we really want to cling to something that isn't ours, we lose sight of everything that we have and all that God provides us. We no longer find contentment here, only a hole that's insatiably empty and needs to be filled. But I think it's normal. It's normal that from time to time we look around and about us and we do see what others have. And sometimes we do want it for ourselves. And that's when, rather than having that longing become a point of contention or envy or jealousy or resentment because they have it and we don't, God invites us to surrender our desire and envy to God so that we in return can receive contentment and peace. God spoke to the people of Israel, and God is still speaking to us. I challenge you to look through these 10 commandments and to really look closely and see how they speak into your life. And pay attention and note which ones you think might actually be easy but can trap you up. God has given us guidance and wisdom, the guidance and wisdom that we need and able to flourish with our God, with our families, with one another. And if we love God and honor God with intention, God is found in our Sabbath again and again. If we commit to being people who do no harm, we become transformed to be people who bear life, love, generosity, and truth to others. We may say that we stand against murder, that we would never commit adultery, that we would never steal, and heavens, we would never say something bad about somebody unwarranted. The question is, what do you do when you witness that in others? Do you let it go on, or do you have the courage to stand up and to call it out so that it can be corrected and healed? If we but take time to remember with gratitude everything God has done for us and all that we actually have right now, we will know not only that we are enough, we will know what it is to have abundance. Within this community, we have generally enough. Sometimes we note when someone is struggling and somebody is in need of something more. And it is our call as Christians to do our part to help them get what they need. It's not that they want it, it's that they need it. But you and I, we have abundance to share. This God who gives life sent Jesus into the world to show us and demonstrate for us what it means to love, what it means to hold Sabbath, what it means to surrender our idols and our egos, what it means to acknowledge that which we covet, and then do our part in prayer and with God's help to transform it. May God continue to grace us with awareness of who we are and continue to call us into the structures and the laws that help us to live faithful lives. Amen.